Hello my friends, welcome to my corner. Samantha Schweblin is probably the most well-known contemporary Argentine author. She has been nominated and has won numerous awards, and perhaps most notably in the English-speaking world, she has been nominated, shortlisted, longlisted for the Man Booker International Prize. So what I wanted to do was to put together an introduction slash overview of her works. We are looking at 3 collections of short stories, 1 novella and 1 novel. I'm going to be looking primarily at what is available in English, which is slightly different than what is available in Spanish, the original editions. So I hope that this video will give you an idea of her style, the topics that she likes to explore, and also just her general approach to fiction. So Samantha Schweblin's first book was El Núcleo del Disturbio from 2002. Some of the stories that were featured in that collection appeared later on in other collections. So we are going to start with Pájaros en la Boca, Mouthful of Birds, which was originally published in 2009 but was translated into English for the first time in 2019. If you look at the Spanish edition, at least the one that I have, it features 22 stories. In the English version, you have 20 stories. And by the way, just like all of Schweblin's works, this one was translated by Megan McDowell, who is a fantastic translator. So I have read Schweblin both in Spanish and in English, and I can tell you that in both languages, she reads very well. So since we have quite a few stories here, what I thought I would do was to give you just an idea of what my favorite stories were, and then to mention my top 3. So that's what I'm gonna do. I really enjoyed Butterflies. That was the first one that caught my attention, Mariposas. It's about 2 men who are waiting for their kids to come out of school, so they're waiting just outside of school. And one of them decides to kill a butterfly, and then things get interesting after that. The title story, Pájaros en la Boca, Mouthful of Birds, is one of my favorites. That would be one of my top 3 stories. It's about a girl who has an irrepressible desire to eat live birds. For the most part, what we have here, what the story explores, is the reaction of her parents to that situation and how they do their best to deal with that, which, as you can imagine, is quite an issue. I really liked also Matar a un Perro. The title in the English translation is a little, well, actually quite a bit more subtle than that, because matar un perro means to kill a dog, right? But the title in English is The Test. In this one, a man is observed as he kills a dog by somebody who wants to make sure that he will be able to handle more, important and more difficult missions in the future. So it was really difficult to read. It's one of those really tough stories. There's a longer story, not that long, we're still talking less than 20 pages, titled Hacia la Alegre Civilización, so Toward Happy Civilization is the title in English, and I really liked this one. This one was also one of my top 3. There's a man at a train station who wants to buy a train ticket, and the seller refuses to sell him the ticket. So he is basically, the man who wants to travel is basically abducted by the ticket seller and his family, and when he goes to their place, he realizes that he is not the only one in that situation. I also liked Mi Hermano Walter, My Brother Walter. This one is about a situation, really. There's a man who is miserable, he's suffering a lot, and it seems that everybody around him is happy, as if, the happiness of the people around him were proportional to his misery. So it's a very interesting exploration of that, how misery and happiness can go together sometimes. There is also El Hombre Sirena, the merman, about a young woman who has a conversation with a merman, and this conversation gives her hope, at least momentarily. Another highlight was Cabezas contra el Asfalto, translated into English as Heads Against Concrete. There's a man in this one who has an impulse to smash people's heads against the concrete. It's something that has happened, since he was a kid. When he was a kid, he did it, and he continues to have that urge. So what he decides to do is to turn that into a form of artistic expression. And he paints images in which somebody is smashing somebody's head against the concrete, and it's a big hit. You know, it's a success. So this could be a commentary on the, you know, the I guess the salvific power of art, you know, the redemption through art, or also it could be a comment on the ridiculousness of some forms of artistic expression, and you know, a comment on the how sometimes the art world can get a little bit, you know, questionable, to say the least. La medida de las cosas was another one that I enjoyed. The size of things. This one has a man who goes to a toy store, and he stays there basically forever. I really like what she does with this situation right there. It gets more interesting than that. I'm just telling you, you know, the basic premise of the tale. And another story that was in my top three, so this is the one that we are missing, was La pesada valija de Benavides, the heavy suitcase of Benavides, in which a man has killed his wife and basically stuffed her body into a briefcase, right? A suitcase, I mean. And this thing, you know, the suitcase with the body inside, is also taken to an exhibit and turned into a work of art. And basically the story tells you the reaction of people towards this piece of quote-unquote art. So we have another comment on how ridiculous, you know, we can get when it comes to the things that we consider to be art. And the last one that I wanted to mention from this collection is Perdiendo Velocidad, Slowing Down. Okay, this one, the character, he worked for a circus, so he was one of those guys that are shot from a cannon. And at one point he thinks that he is becoming slower and slower, and he tells his friend, you know, I feel like I'm losing speed right here, you know, like I'm getting slower and slower. His friend was the guy who used to light the cannon. The ending in this story is just brilliant. It's one of those Cortázar endings, you know. So that was also one of my favorite stories. So this is a very good collection that features maybe a handful of excellent stories. I would say, however, that it's not as original as her later work. For instance, you can really feel the influence of Cortázar here. Not necessarily in her style, but in the approach. And if you read the stories, you're going to see what I mean by that. So that was my final assessment of this collection, Pájaros en la Boca, Mouthful of Birds. Let's look at Fever Dream, as it is known in English, or as it is known in Spanish, Distancia de Rescate. A more subtle title right there in the Spanish version. This is a novella. Okay, we're going to talk briefly about that in a second. But basically what we have is two women and their kids. We have Amanda and her daughter Nina, and on the other hand, Carla and her son David. The novella, the story, is basically a conversation between Amanda and Carla's, her friend, son David, okay, who is almost like interrogating her. This is almost like an interrogation. It's a dialogic approach that reminded me for a second of Manuel Puig's The Kiss of the Spider Woman. It's a completely different text, but that is also a novel that takes place basically as a dialogue. So what happens here is this, the nucleus of the story is this. Amanda arrives with her daughter Nina at a small town, and she almost immediately meets Carla, who has her son David, right? And the two women, the mothers, become friends almost immediately. And what happens also very early in the story is that Carla's son, David, drinks water from a contaminated source. And he is changed, you know, changed utterly, to borrow a phrase that has become famous. That is the nucleus of the story. So the tale is really the story of Amanda, who is dying. An alternate title for this novella could be As I Lay Dying, you know, because that is basically what is happening to Amanda. Fever Dream, or Distancia de Rescate, has been described as a story of motherhood and contamination. So many people have also seen it as an environmentalist story, an environmentalist novella. That brings us to the title, okay, when we talk about motherhood, because there's quite a difference here in the title. Distancia de Rescate, of course, means rescue distance, and it is basically the distance that separates Amanda from her daughter Nina, in case she needs to rescue her, in case there is trouble. So you could see the title as a kind of metaphorical umbilical cord, if you want to look at it that way. So rescue distance, right? The genre, let's talk about that. This is a novella, okay? Many people have described it as a novel, but if you look at it, in this Spanish edition, the font is quite large, the pages are very small, and it is exactly 124 pages. So because of the, the large font and the small pages, I would say this is probably between 80 and 100 pages in a normal type of font and page. Now, the novella as a genre, as I have said before, because this is one of my favorite topics actually, has not much to do with the length of the story, the physical length or the number of pages. It has more to do with the structure of the narrative. In this case, what we have is the re-examination of a given situation. That is what the novella does. I'm sorry about the rhyme there, but that's the best way that I can find to tell you what this is about. So, re-examination of a situation. The situation right here is that we have a group of people who have been contaminated, right? Who have suffered the effects of pollution. And when David asks Amanda to tell the story, he is trying to help her to assess the damage, right? To see what has happened, to come to terms with this irreversible damage that has been caused. So you can see the structure of the novella right there. If you read this one, you're going to see that it doesn't follow the traditional structure of a novel, precisely because it's not a novel, it's a novella. So that is Distancia de Rescate, or Fever Dream, as it is known in English. Siete Casas Vacías was published for the first time in 2015 in the original Spanish edition, but it was only last year, 2022, that this was translated into English for the first time. As the title seems to indicate, we have 7 stories here about the concept of the house, the spaces that we inhabit, which are kind of like extensions of ourselves too. This one is much more original, if you ask me, than her first collection of stories. But I also felt that it was a little less powerful than Mouthful of Birds. Okay, so it has only 7 stories, so it's very manageable for readers and critics. The first one is Nada de todo esto, which is none of that. It's a story about a woman and her daughter who visit strangers' houses. Sometimes they go inside, they rearrange things, they take things. I was reminded of many movies like Amélie, like Chungking Express, like Vive l'Amour, the Tsai Ming-liang movie. Many films that have this element right there of invading another person's privacy. That is what this story is basically about, the need that we have to appropriate other people's things and other people's spaces. The next 2 I did not like as much as the first one. We have Mis Padres y Mis Hijos, My Parents and My Children. This one was perplexing to me. It's about a man, his ex-wife, and the woman's boyfriend. They are visiting the man's wife with the kids. And outside, the man's parents are playing with water with no clothes on. It's a very strange situation. Then things get interesting when the kids all of a sudden disappear. They call the police. I felt that it was almost like trivial. Like a bit of a joke, which may be one of the purposes of the story, really. Then we have Pasa siempre en esta casa. It happens all the time in this house, in which you have a story of neighbors, right? Just like the first story, it's a story of neighbors too. And in this one, there's a woman who lives next to a couple whose son has passed away. And every now and then, the clothes from the dead son from the house next door, she finds them in her yard, in her backyard. So she doesn't know who is throwing them, but the man comes over and picks up the clothes. That is the situation that is explored here. So this one is a little bit more pathetic, more deep than the previous one. There's a very long story, okay, occupying almost 100 pages. La Respiración Cavernaria, or Breath from the Depths. This one is about a woman, an elderly woman, who has the will to die. So it's a response to that concept of the ars moriendi, the art of dying, basically. It's also about her relationship with her husband. It's a very powerful story. I would almost say that it is a novella because of the structure, once again. That was, I felt, one of the best stories in this collection. Then after that, 40 centímetros cuadrados, that one was translated as 2 square feet. So we have a different language and a different system. You know, it was translated from the metric system also. About a woman who has come back to Buenos Aires with her husband. This is one story, by the way, that actually takes place in Buenos Aires. And it's obviously in Buenos Aires explicitly. All the other stories, as much of Schweblin's work, could take place anywhere else. You know, for Distancia de Rescate, Fever Dream, you can also tell that that is Argentina, right? But the others are global stories for the most part. And this one is about a woman who feels that she cannot go back home. Okay, she goes out to buy aspirin for her mother-in-law, and then she has this experience right there that is, that does something to her. That's the best way that I can put it. After that comes what is to me Schweblin's best short story, which won the Juan Rulfo Prize. And that is, let me see if I have, yes, the title in Spanish is Un hombre sin suerte, an unlucky man in English. In this one, a little girl has to go to the hospital because her sister drinks bleach right when it's the little girl's birthday. So it's her birthday, but it's her sister who is in trouble and has to go to the hospital. And in the hospital, right there, she meets a stranger. That's all that I'm going to say. This is a story that you really want to experience by yourself. It traces the consequences of that encounter. And it's really one of her best tales. And the last one is Salir, which was translated into English as out. A woman is having a conversation with her husband. And she's expected to say something. That's the way she puts it. You know, it's her turn to speak. So as a way of dealing with that situation, she finds a way to go out in the middle of that conversation. You can think about it as a fantasy, but it could also be real, you know? So there's that ambiguity right there. So yeah, that is Siete Casas Vacías, 7 Empty Houses, her second collection to be translated into English. And finally, we have Kentucky's, a novel that I have literally just finished reading. It's about our relationship with technology. Kentucky is basically a stuffed animal that has a camera inside, and you have two kinds of people. You have the owners of the stuffed animal and the people who have access to the camera. One person has basically the company of the stuffed animal, and the other person gets the ability or the opportunity to watch what another human being does. This is a novel about voyeurism in many ways. Now, the owner and the watcher, to give them a name, cannot communicate directly, unless, of course, they get creative and they find a way to, say what their phone number is or something like that. So there is that distance between the people who are connected by this type of technology. The novel itself, you could say it's a global novel because it deals with characters who live in Mexico, who live in Croatia, who live in Germany, in Italy, and many other places. It does not really have a protagonist, okay? We follow a handful of characters, so that is how the novel achieves some kind of unity when it comes to the character, right? I see a main influence here of Philip K. Dick. Because of that, you know how in some of Philip K. Dick's novels you have a group of characters and you see the results or the effects of some kind of a technological thing, so that is what's going on here in Kentucky's. You could read it as a metaphor for the internet, for smartphones, for social media. It could be so many things, and it's a great exploration of the results of implementing a new technology, what it does to ourselves and what it does also to our quote-unquote real relationships. I enjoyed both Distancia de Rescate, the novella, and Kentucky's, the novel, equally, but I see why Distancia de Rescate is considered to be a superior work. But in any case, Kentucky was just a fun read, and I really enjoyed this excursion of her into the realm of fantasy. So that is my quick overview of Samantha Schweblin's work to date. Have you read her? Please feel free to share your experience with us. You know that I always enjoy hearing about that. And if you have any questions, comments, recommendations, etc., you know that I'm always listening. Thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day.